Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Venus and Gemini. We are so lucky to have Cassandra Ferland here with us again. And if you haven't already, you should go back and listen to Cassandra's first episode. But she is an amazing mentor, yoga teacher, artist, musician, fine jeweler, mom, friend. And did I miss any important pieces?
I'm an excellent chef.
Gosh, that is true. She is an excellent chef. She also leads some incredible retreats, and specifically with some of her mentoring, she's a really amazing yoga teacher trainer. She trains other yoga teachers and specializes in some really cool stuff, which you can hear all about in the first epised. But she's a badass. She's the best. And I believe you just had a birthday, right? Happy birthday!
I did. Thank you.
You're
Yeah.
an Aquarius, right?
Yeah. I mean, I am full on 110% Aquarian. You know? It's so weird. Everyone says like, oh yeah, I'm so this, I'm so that. But it's funny. My father and I are pretty different in many ways, but he is 1 week, he was born 1 week earlier than me in 20 years. Right. And so anyway, our birthdays are very close. And when I look at the things that we have in common, it is 100% all those aquarium attributes, like bigger thinker, loves to plan and plot, has like a million pots that they're stirring at all times.
Can you remind me, do you remember your moon and rising?
My moon is Aries.
That
Yeah.
tracks.
I've got that fiery warrior there for sure. And
Totally.
I can't remember my rising at the moment, actually. Why is it
Mm.
escaping me? Yeah. I'm not sure. Actually, it's funny. I was like knee deep in all the astrology stuff, probably, well, again, when my daughter was born, right? When Quinn was born, which is 5.5 years ago now. And so, yeah, I got really deep into that. I got into like my husband and I's astrology together, her astrology, because like she's quite interesting being born on solstice, on
Mhm.
summer
That
solstice.
was yeah, and it was it like the first day, I think, of Cancer season, that is, right? Or the
And
last
it
day of
was
Gemini. I think it was the first day of Cancer season. She's a Cancer, right?
Yep, she's a Cancer. It was bizarre because if she would have been born in the AM, she would have been Gemini, and then if she would have been born in the PM, she was Cancer, and so she was Cancer. And she was also born during an eclipse, right? That Ring of Fire eclipse in the middle of the pandemic, in the middle of New York City. And it
Oh,
kind of
wild.
couldn't have gotten weirder and bolder. What a bold entrance!
She was
So
basically born in a vortex,
yeah,
like a
yeah.
time warp, kind of.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that actually because I was trying to explain it to my husband. It's still kind of hard to put into words, but the moment she was born, well, I explained to him that I kind of felt like I was like slapped in the face by God. Like I was just stunned, like absolutely stunned by by the birthing of my daughter. But in the aftermath, like waking up the next day, in the days to follow, I felt this like almost indescribable differentiation with like how I experience time. It just went from like this more like cerebral concept of time to like suddenly it felt like any moment I could, in a very sensual, like experiential way, expand it out like it was an accordion. And I
Mm.
could feel multiple points of my life in at the same time, and some part of it had to do with her, suddenly it's like she became at this certain point in my life. And there's this like now, um, I don't know, this like relationship between her life and her age at any one time and mine. And yeah, it's hard to explain, but I could like imagine her being 16 or being 40 or being 60, right? And like myself within all of that. And um Yeah, it almost felt like a superhuman characteristic I was able to suddenly embody.
And do you still feel that extending, or was it kind of around that time period?
I still can feel it, but I have to be like in a certain space. Like, the space that we try to cultivate in meditation where
Mm.
we are blasted wide open. That happened for me in the whole experience of having her. I mean, it was weird because I didn't feel this as much while pregnant. It was like the process of giving birth and then the after effects of that created that for me. I mean, a lot of things happened. Like in the weeks after having her, I was like out of my mind tired, of course, right? I mean, we had all these problems with her being able to feed properly. And, when anything goes down like that, you're like, all hands on deck. I was like, I was pumping, power pumping in order to try to get my supply up because she wasn't latching. And so I engorged and then my milk kind of went away and I had to like play catch up. So it was a lot of intensity. But then at the same time, I was still very, very connected to that feeling, this like weird spaciousness that left me wide open and kind of vulnerable too, right? So there's something about being wide open that's vulnerable, but also able to catch whatever the universe, like that inspiration. I mean, I came up with lullabies. I have like 10 lullabies. And at some point, my
Wow.
husband Boyd was like, we got to get these down. But I just would come up with melodies and then it would be like 1 a.m. and I'm feeding her. It'd be like 4 a.m. and I'm feeding her again. And then I would just like be jotting down little rhymes that I thought could go, little phrases that I thought would go in it. And I ended up coming up with a bunch of, yeah, whole, one of them is really long and it's like, has her name in it. And I call her Quinnie Pie. And, so that little quip that we use all the time with her, that little, namesake came from that. And yeah, it's like a 2-minute long lullaby, and then I have other little ones that I made for her, and it just felt like a really potent, fertile time where I was tapped in, and I didn't even have to effort it, like, it just came.
Wow, this is making me think of, well, it's interesting, right? Because you had this experience, and then once you had the experience, it's like you can connect back to it because, like, you had it. So it's like, it's almost like you went to a place, and because you've gone there now, you can go there again.
Yeah. Actually, you know what? It changed my relationship to creativity and art making completely. Because I
Mm.
realized that I had spent a lot of time, in art school for me, there was a lot of cerebral activity going on there. I mean, the school was very intense about like having a concept behind everything. If you can't talk about this and critique, it's worthless. Like you need to be able to back up why you're doing what you're doing, what the process, like thought process is behind it. It can't be because it's a pretty picture, right? There needs to be like something else, right, underneath it all. And so that was a lot of my background. And it's not that I don't appreciate that, but this real cerebral element can take over. And I think that's actually true of everything in life. Like the brain kind of gaslights us into believing that the intellect is the one major best way to maneuver through life, and it wants to be in the front seat. It wants to be the driver all the time. But there are these, one of the main reasons why I do yoga is to get out of that, is to force my brain into the back seat. And then it's like trying to be the backseat driver still for half of it, going like, hey, wait, no, take a left turn. And you just have to be like, psh, psh, like, I've got other things going on. And they whisper, you yell, but I need to listen to the whispers right now. Right. And so those other aspects and other like intelligences that are within us we need to give them space to breathe too, right? And we need to get more well versed with those. And so with the art making process, I had really gotten to this place and I actually stopped doing art for a little while after school, especially when I was really working more in the gallery scene. I stopped being as creative because there was something like the juice was gone. Like when it really came from a place, I had just gotten it drilled into me that I had to be coming from this more cerebral place. I don't know, the magic felt like lost on me. And I kind of felt like I couldn't pick that thread up again, like why I felt the creative impulse in the first place. Right. So to have that experience where I felt like blasted wide open, and I felt like this direct line to all that inspires was just like flowing right out of me, really reminded me that we make it so much harder than it needs to be. Like, our job is actually to get out of the mental space and to open ourselves up to a more like less a line of thinking and more of feeling your way through things and allowing things to unfold and to meander and to be like, "Oh, that's a dead end. All right, what about this?" And that, as long as you're not coming and, if that analytical mind comes back in, it'll start criticizing you when you hit that dead end, right? But if you just come at it from this place of curiosity, it can all be interesting. And um, it keeps that magical connection to the inspiration flowing. So, after having that experience, I'm able to connect back to it when I want to or need to, if I can get my head out of the way, you know?
Well, this is interesting because it's making me think of a few things. One, you talking about like in art school and and in the art world, maybe in general, being gaslit into this idea of like, it has to happen like kind of this certain way, potentially. And how with birth and with our bodies in general, how we're kind of gaslit into basically being made to feel like we're not an authority on our own bodies and that we should trust someone else above all else, above our own wisdom of what we're experiencing in our body. And also how we talked a lot about on the last episode, it's like with yoga, what yoga is trying to do generally is teaching you to be able to see and to be able to listen and to kind of be able to feel. And how you were doing that as your profession for quite a many years as you led up to your experience of giving birth. So you were quite in this place of, it makes me think of the word guru, to not guruize you, but
Yeah.
guru, remover of darkness, right? It's removing the darkness so that you can see and things can be illuminated. And having spent such a big portion of your life dedicated towards seeing and feeling and connecting, and then how that sort of delivered you to this place where it seems like you were just very available to go there and like have this experience of, and I think, people can get there in all kinds of different ways. And it sounds a little bit too like it was like a psychedelic experience, which
I've
is,
had some of those too, yeah, so I can talk to the differences, but yeah. Yeah.
and this thing of having this thing in life that then brought you to, because what you're saying with how it changed your experience of creativity too, to be just a little bit more like, oh, things were coming to you and you were like having this openness. I'm wondering, I'm like, does it have something to do with how birth connects you so deeply to your humanness? It's this big, like, you are fucking so human. And that opening a little bit your ability for these like incredible human abilities that we have for creativity in all the different ways.
I mean, yeah, it's striking me that the things that interest me the most are the ones that really force you to contend with or immerse yourself in that humanity, for like whether it's like the most primal aspects, right? Of just like literally having a body, right? And then being embodied in the world, right? Empowered in that body, or it's, more like the nuance and like the artistry of living so that you can, what the yogis call like, like the dance of life, right? That interconnection with Leela. Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating because I do feel like the intellect plays a role in all of this stuff. Right. But it's got to be like a push and pull. Like we do, like one of my favorite artists, Rauschenberg. Do you know Robert Rauschenberg?
Mm-mm.
So he's like pretty famous he had a bunch of guys that he did work with in like the 1960s, like Jasper Johns is another one you might have heard of, but he does a lot of different work, paintings, prints, and there's some different documentaries on him. And one of the things that really stuck out to me is this documentary that I watched where it showed him making work. And he was like, our job as artists is to get out of our own way in the midst of the process and create, create, create. And then our job is to look back and go, okay, now I call. right? Now I decide
Mm.
where the juiciness is, right, in all this that I made, but stopping yourself along the way, right? Stop censoring yourself. Stop. What are you afraid of? That you're going to make something that's not that great? Who cares? Like, we're going to make some not that great stuff along the way. Again, that's that human part of us that wants to be seen as perfect and pristine all of the time, right? And, it's so funny because the internet only exacerbates that. And we all have to be so put together, and we can't stumble. And if we do, like, it's looked down upon. Or then alternatively, it's made like an interesting element, authenticity. People want it so much. And now we can sell authenticity too, and so it's a mind fuck. It's a bit of a minefield, to have to try to navigate through the world and have that interplay between really feeling your way through and keeping things creative and open and interesting and curiosity at the forefront, and then having that part of you that's going like, okay, and now, like, with my intellect, I'm going to use it as the tool in this moment. Where's the direction, right? But because the thing is that when we've had that experience where we do let something flow through us, people can have it doing a million things, cooking, gardening. I mean, really anything can be an artful endeavor. I'm a huge fan of this like concept of kind of like artful living. I feel like sometimes it gets lost in the fray. Like, we want to be able to do something so well that, like, we then are afraid to do a bunch of things not, kind of like in our own way, maybe not seen as necessarily perfect. I mean, I can tell you right now, I'm learning on the go with my garden. Lived in New York City for 15 years and I did zero landscaping. So this is all very new to me. But if you can allow yourself that discomfort of being, of searching and being in the questions, and then make it your job not to figure it all out ahead of time, but to kind of, put yourself in a space where you're more open to intuition, then I find it a more interesting experience to go through. And then on the other end of that, you can look at that and use your intellect, and then your intellect and your intuition and what has come from your intuition come together instead of just the intellect trying to talk over everything, which is definitely one of my
Totally.
problems.
And gardening, farming is such a good analogy for this, right? Because there's the very mundane parts of like, you have to do these parts and you have to do them again and again. You have to do them every year. And it's a lot of work. And then through that, it's like you get this like in sync with nature. You start to just like some things, it's almost like you just feel them and then you can apply that to it. And then things start to kind of produce in a way that is more abundant. And then you can use that in all kinds of creative ways. It starts to like take on a life of its own. There's like you
Yeah.
applying this like repetitive. And then there's a part where nature comes in and kind of adds a little something like that too. And all of this make me think of, one way that you have chosen to pursue this through your life is through being a mother. And there is so much talk. We're talking so differently about that these days over the past like 10 years, especially, I feel like. And a lot about this idea of matrescence. And you hear a lot of people talking about this idea of like, you are not the same after you have a child. And some people being like, you're even an entirely different person with a whole new personality. What do you think about that? How do you relate to that? How has that been for you?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely wouldn't say I'm a different person. I would say that you lose yourself for a hot minute, like your understanding of yourself is like an earthquake happens in your city, and then you can't traverse the same routes you used to anymore. And you don't even know if you want to get over to that side of the city anymore. I mean, just, it really just changes everything. And it does force a kind of reckoning, an inner reckoning of almost like cataloging, like as you reabsorb back into yourself, right? As you slowly, I mean, it's like over time kind of gain autonomy over your body again. If you breastfeed, you go through an extended period of time where your body isn't yours, so much stuff happens there. I mean, stuff that I just would not have expected, like, I don't know. I was very surprised by how emotional breastfeeding was for me. It started off good. I was very excited. My milk came in and then suddenly, we had issues with feeding and then it tanked and then I was playing catch up forevermore. And, we eventually ended up going to like a pumping situation. And so she wasn't breastfeeding after 5 months. She was bottle feeding, and I had feelings about that. I had feelings about, when I would finally get to a certain amount that I was making, she's already, you know, taking in more than that. And so then we need to supplement. What are we going to do about that? And feelings about that. And if you log on to the internet, whoo boy, do we have feelings about that. And this is the thing that has changed so much since like our mother's generation. They didn't have an internet with a bunch of voices yelling at them. And it's a positive and a negative, right? Because if all you have around you is a certain kind of community, the internet allows you access to a different kind of community, right? You can find your people there. But you also just find a cacophony of voices. And I found that it just all became too much. And I was very annoyed by the hyperpolarization around everything. Fed is best. No, breast is best. And don't pretend that it is. I was already having a lot of feelings, and I was very vulnerable, right? I was in this like vulnerable, blasted wide open space. And I found that I became more sensitive to external everything, just noise. And I wanted to cut down on the noise. So I found myself needing to be really rigid and, just regimented about like how much I was on the internet and what I was doing on the internet. And like, stop looking at those comments. Like, it's not your business what everyone thinks about everything, right? And it's like if your own brain can give you way too much noise, making it hard to like sift through and connect back to your intuition. Imagine what it is when there's this whole other layer of everyone else's thoughts and feelings about it all, And so rarely are people on the internet talking about things in a way that is humble, where they're leaving space for other people's experiences or other ways of thinking or feeling. It's always just like, this is the way things are, black and white. And so sometimes you get the worst of the worst on there. But, I don't know. Like, I try to remember too, like, my parents didn't have Google. So, like, they were only able to do so much, right? And that's a double-edged sword. It's like, there's the benefit and then there's the negative, right? So I try to use the internet and the outer world. I don't use it so much anymore, but, especially up to like maybe 4 years old, you're going online being like, what's this rash? I mean? And imagining not being able to do that, but it's just, yeah, it's a lot to sift through because there's a ton of misinformation on the internet too, about formula or anything, and literally everything. Every single thing on the vaccines, vitamin K, and so as you're trying to figure things out with your kiddo, I think that can just become a huge hindrance. And so I needed to really find a way to get what I needed from the internet and like use my intellect again to parse out like information that I need and then sit with it all, interpret it, feel my way through it, use my gut too, and make next steps. So it's been kind of interesting, having just realizing that that the internet is not only making things more problematic for everyone on an individual level, but when you're a mother, you've got this, I can't even explain to you the extra added mental load that is placed on parents, but especially mothers. I mean, I had to have a baby app for everything. I couldn't remember anymore. And this is like me, type A gal who just like has a great memory, couldn't remember like what time my kid went for her nap, how many times she went to the bathroom in a day or a week, and there are times when you're breastfeeding, you really need to actually know this kind of output. So it's just this extreme mental load. And then you have to be careful about the other mental load that you're adding in by allowing outside voices. And so I think navigating through that is part of the challenge of also finding yourself again, right? It's just that there's all these a million voices tuning in and giving you opinions about, what it is to be a mother and like how you should be as a mother moving through the world, when the reality is everyone has to kind of find their way and their individual spirit and their kids' individual spirit are going to work in harmony to like create this package deal, right? And it's like yours and yours alone. Um, I mean, I do think that it's been extremely transformative in a way that only having a kid can be. There are other really big transformational things. I mean, I think that the loss of a partner or someone really, important to you that plays a really large role in your life could be one of those transformative moments. Or also you're trying to refine yourself and move through the world, right? Again, after this loss. There's other times where we have to make these seismic shifts. But I think what's interesting is that in motherhood, it gets glossed over because you have this kid and everyone's like, oh, it's so beautiful. Now you're in this like new phase of your life. And it's like, yes. And my body doesn't feel like my own. It feels literally foreign. I mean, I had her, right? And she's like taking up all this space. The minute she left my body, I felt a gaping hole in my body where my core should have been, you know? And breathing felt revolutionary. I was laying in bed, I remember like the week after, and I was just like soaking all this up, especially as a woman who works, has worked with women through pregnancy too. I was like, wow, this information I am putting this in my back pocket for later. But just breathing out and feeling all of the core mechanisms work when you're laying down, because they don't work properly when you're sitting up or standing up anymore. And then getting them back online while your organs are still not in their right place, recognizing that your organs take an entire, like whatever it took to have your baby 9 months, it's going to take about that for your organs to migrate back to their original locations. And so you're just not, even on a physical, fundamental level, not your old self, right? And you never quite will be again. I think also the energetics and emotional aspect of like going through that portal, so you were my doula, right? And we did some talking about that kind of feeling of this like threshold. And I was really excited to meet this other version of me on the other side. But
Mm.
I have to say that it took me a long time to appreciate and then meet that person. It wasn't like a boom. It was like as I got to the other side, I was overwhelmed with the amount of new responsibilities, right? Keeping this little human alive and all of the questions and answers that I had to come up with, right? Suddenly I'm the one responsible for every answer that needs to be made right away. And I think that definitely pushed me into, it was in the middle of COVID. So it pushed me
Mhm.
into this mode that I hadn't seen for a long time, like stuffed old patterns of like needing, again, to just like intellect my way into controlling everything. That kind of came back up for me. And it was like, if I could just rabbit hole on the internet long enough, I'm going to figure out how to make sure this breastfeeding thing goes perfectly. Right. And then to just eventually realize like you kind of have to let go of that. It's like layers, if I had to let go of that. That felt emotional. Then later I looked back at how harsh and like unsupportive my mental space was around the challenges of breastfeeding, that I felt bad in retrospect for that version of me and like needed to hold some space for that version of me. So it's like so multi-layered, but the process of going through that, of becoming that person that can look back and hold space, like a sacred kind of space for this person who is just trying to figure it out after the earthquake, that is what like prepares me to be the mother for my kid and hold the space for them as they birth all the things they're going to in the world, right? All
Mm.
these different versions of themselves.
So it's kind of like you mothering yourself a little bit through this earthquake moment. And it sounds a bit like this happens, the birth happens. And I'm getting an image in my mind that's like you get leased out for a few years in a way.
Yeah.
Like you go away from yourself a little bit because you're like, I am being leased to the baby in a way. And it's like any prioritization of self where like I would put myself first and that put your oxygen mask on before the baby, like that kind of actually changes. It's like, no, actually, it's going to be putting the baby's oxygen mask on first. Like I am going to be feeding them from my body and like that needs to happen. And the feeling, the very biological feeling that maybe it's hard to think about until this happens to you, that is like, no, like the baby eating does feel almost more important than me eating, like because they can't advocate for themselves. So I am responsible to make sure that that happens at all. And that is so important. Like all of the
Yeah.
things, and there being so much less time to be with yourself, to see yourself, to have any of that happen. And then also having to make sure that you don't die while this is happening. And like there's still being that part of you that is like holding the anchor for that. I mean, like, we're going to be all right. Like, we're going to stay, our boat's going to stay on top of the water here. And then it all sort of coming together when you are this person that now kept this baby alive and also kept yourself alive.
Yeah, and I do think there's like a continuous leveling up, like you are kind of a wreck after. I mean, I was like physically I felt like a wreck. The pregnancy was fine. The postpartum was hard. Really hard. I don't think people talk about it enough.
Tell us about the things, because so often I hear from women who have recently had a baby, so many things. They're like, no one tells you any of this stuff. And also, something that I hear all the time is just like you said about the pressure. They're like, it is so much pressure. It feels so sensitive, which of course it does, right? Like if you just had a freaking earthquake, you're going to feel sensitive. And then there's also people are looking you a little bit, I think, like you're a museum exhibit, and that's kind of weird.
And everyone has opinions too. And then they
And
just
then they're
give them
like,
in this
"Bye."
really casual way. Yeah. They're like, you should just do this. Or like, I
Bye.
mean, you know what they say, blah, blah, You're like, thanks. Thanks for that. Yeah, I know. I mean, one of the things that was, I mean, I guess no one really, maybe you can't articulate enough, or it's really hard to articulate, so people don't. But that whole, like, I literally now have like a bowl full of jelly, or like what was like, I mean, it literally felt like a hole to me, and my core didn't work properly. So the pelvic floor is this hammock of muscles, right? There's like 17 muscles. And when you breathe, the pelvis is like releasing. When you breathe in, it's releasing down a little bit. It's connected to the diaphragm movement, and which is what makes the pelvic floor so important. But when you say pelvic floor, if anyone knows anything about it, most of the time they know Kegels, do Kegels, engage your pelvic floor. That's it. That's all they ever hear about. And then you don't really get this beautiful balance that's happened. You breathe in, you've got this diaphragm muscle that pulls down, that creates that vacuum for the breath in. And then the pelvic floor has to soften too. And then when you exhale and engage, especially in a really engaged way where the navel's pulling in, then the pelvic floor pulls up. And so it's this circular, right, kind of hammock. And sometimes it's referred to as like a clock, right? You can think of it as a clock. And things can go wrong because like a pressure system. And as you're regaining, well, you have a baby, and whether you have a baby vaginally or you have a baby through C-section, the pressure has been altered forevermore because you have had a baby, a womb, everything, right? Like heaviness on this pelvic floor for 9 months. And then especially, I mean, gosh, how long was that? I pushed for 2.5 hours. Looking back, that is one thing I wish that I would have waited for like a more of like a, sense that I needed to push. They were just like, you're ready. You're effaced, you're ready to go. And I was like, okay, poor Boyd, my husband thought, it's going to be 20 minutes later, we're going to have a baby on our hands. But not to be. Anyway, I felt later every single one of those pelvic floor muscles. When I would try to sit, when I extended a leg out, when I stood up, when I held my 7-pound baby and someone put me in my arms, I could feel my pelvic floor and the heaviness on my pelvic floor, because it was like I had just run a marathon, or it's like if you like have to hold your arm like this, like carrying groceries, right, for 20 minutes. Everyone in a city has done this before. They're like, I should not have bought this many things, right? They're carrying around that heavy jar of whatever, right? That bone broth or whatever. And then they can feel it later, right, in the bicep. And that's how it felt in my pelvic floor. And I had to do a lot of like relearning. I mean, for like a few years, relearning and integrating how to use my pelvic floor at every step of the way, because it just felt like everything was off. It was just like wonky. During my pregnancy, they talk a lot like about like you have to watch out for doing core work especially core work where you're like facing the floor because you can get this doming. And I didn't really get that doming into the last minute in my pregnancy, but postpartum, I couldn't keep it away. It was just like there right away. And I had to do a lot of modifying in order to really just build up my core in the simplest ways, like doing marches, standing marches, or like laying marches, or, just breathing in a really conscious way, aware of my pelvic floor and sensing it like it was an elevator going up and going back down. And I began to realize too that I had like a tendency towards hypertonic pelvic floor. That's like holding, and it's again like holding your bicep muscle all the time. And so then it feels weak sometimes. And that's not great, especially when you're trying to do something hard. So that was breathing is fundamental here, right? And so we're using it at every moment of every day, anytime any kind of challenge comes in. And so that was really fascinating to me and really expansive for my own yoga practice, right? As a teacher, I felt like my offerings were deepening quite a bit in that realm. And then I would say the other thing that really struck me was how loose my joints were
Mm.
personally. And I'm not a hypermobile person, but I had so many issues postpartum because, it's different for everyone because people have different tolerances with their hormone levels. But I found that it was probably 6 months after I stopped breastfeeding finally that my joints felt more secure and I stopped having the issues I was having with my wrists. So this thing can happen with the thumb side of your wrist where you get it's called Decker vein syndrome, aka mommy's thumb, because you're constantly picking up your kid like this and you don't realize that until it's painful. And then every time you do a dish, in your sink, whatever it is you're doing, I mean, you use it a million times. Flexing my hands. I mean, my yoga practice had to change dramatically because my wrists and my sacrum were just blasted wide open and I actually became more of a like Pilates fan and like yoga lattes where I was like Pilatifying my yoga practice so that I could just find that shoring up that I needed, and I think that's something that people don't talk a lot about is just how unsupportive it can feel literally on a physical level and how important it can be to tap into some community that's talking a lot about this, that's giving you instruction on this stuff because it doesn't just come naturally necessarily. And especially when stress
Absolutely.
is hitting your system. I mean, have you ever noticed with certain clients that they can reverse breathe? Like where they breathe in
For
and
sure.
right? Yeah, they pull in their gut. When they exhale, they soften it. And so what's happening when the diaphragm moves down when you breathe in and you pull up your belly is that you're literally fighting yourself on a breath, right? Your body's fighting your body and you're not allowed to take a fuller breath in. And that can happen having nothing to do with, growing and birthing a human. That just happens because of stress in your system. So imagine growing and birthing a human with all the stress that comes from that, right? And I think for me, having a kiddo in the middle of New York City in the middle of COVID was an extra added layer of stress that I didn't feel necessarily during, but I certainly felt as much, as I felt after. After it was, I mean, my daughter never went into another building besides our apartment and the doctor's. Like she didn't go in another apartment. She didn't go in a store. She didn't go on the subway. I mean, I had all these visions of like carrying my, my baby, and taking her on the subway and going into Manhattan and doing my thing. And it was like never going to happen.
And, worth noting that it's like she was born in June 2020, right? So that was really the thick of it, the beginning of it, because COVID in New York at least went on for years, but it wasn't like you got pregnant during that time and knew what you were getting into. You got pregnant before the pandemic started. So your expectation and idea of what all would be definitely wasn't that.
Yeah. I mean, I still
But
remember, so they weren't going to so our hospital thankfully was never saying that a spouse couldn't be there. I think, tell you and Boyd that I would rather try to free birth in the woods than try to give birth alone in a hospital. Wasn't going to happen. But
Some women
also,
did have to, I think, who were in those early weeks, like giving birth like March 2020, which is insane.
right. Exactly. Yeah. Thankfully, our hospital was never, putting those kind of rules in place, but they were doing asinine things. Like they made, my husband leave. He was there already and they made him he was going to be able to stay, and then suddenly he wasn't because of COVID, and it was like, he's here right now. So you want him to go back out into the COVID infected world and then come back?
Come back.
You want him to do that daily? Like, you think that's a good idea? I don't know. Like, the policies didn't make a whole lot of sense, but 2 weeks before they said we could have a doula there. And so we kind of slipped right in like at, a very interesting time. And I just had to trust, trust the universe. So, because, yeah, our home hospital, like the hospital that was nearest to us was Elmhurst Hospital, which
Mm,
like had 4 refrigerated trucks sitting outside. It was like not the place you wanted to be giving birth in that
yeah,
moment in time.
certainly not.
Yeah, like if anything went wrong with the home birth. So, yeah, it was just a very, very interesting time.
Man, I'm remembering when Quinn was born, was sleeping in a tent in my parents' backyard. That's where I was living at the moment. And I remember I came down to the city and she was born all within a day, which it doesn't always go that way. And then at
Yeah.
the end, I remember I went home pretty late and I was peeing outside because I was living in a tent because the house was just so full, like everybody was at the house. And I saw the most beautiful sky. It was like the most gorgeous Milky Way looking thing. It was really magical day.
Mm.
But this is making me think back to this time and like you getting pregnant and that happening before the pandemic. And as you were preparing for this time and thinking you wanted to have a child, how did you kind of make that decision? Because it's a big decision.
It is, yeah. I mean, it's interesting because my husband and I are both creatives. He comes from a small family. He's just got one brother. I come
Mhm.
from a large family, and
How many
I
siblings do you have?
I have 6 siblings, yeah.
Wow.
So, it's just kind of ridiculous. And like I think it's one of the reasons why I like have no tolerance for chaos. Like, it's funny because some of my siblings do, but like I definitely trace my upbringing and just like scrambling for snacks. It was always a thing. Trying to get your hands on snacks before they were gone from the pantry. And just the general chaos of having a big family. And even now, my dad will joke like, oh, the hurricane's coming, brace yourself, when like everyone descends on their house for Christmas. But it's, yeah, because like I have 24 nieces and nephews now. So
That's
it's
wild.
ridiculous. Yeah, it's ridiculous. So like, and in some ways I really love it, but then I also knew that like I was more interested in spending more time like developing my interests and creativity. And I think it is one reason why we waited a little longer to even begin that process of thinking about like, do we want a kid? And then once we did, we thought on it for a while. And it could have been like a flip of a coin. It almost felt like that, where we were like, I mean, I wouldn't be unhappy to have a kid, but it's going to be hard. But and then I don't see how we could do it in this reality that we've made for ourselves here. How would we make it work? I don't know. And then I don't know, I sat and meditated. I really meditated with it for a while and tried again to get out of my head and to get into my heart. And I started to feel like I could be happy, very, very happy not having a kid, but that I also felt like it would bring a really layered experience to things, especially in later decades. So when I shared that with my husband, he sat with that for a while and then he was like, all right, let's try. And so we never really felt like neither of us was like, we want 3 kids or we want 2. We just were like, let's try this out and see what happens. And I always had a feeling I might be a one and done kind of mama, like want to go through the experience, but also want to maybe give them a very different experience than I had. like, just have a lot of time and energy for them. And because I am a person who has a lot of interests and hobbies and things that are really, like, vital for me to stay connected to my sense of self, I didn't wanna spread myself too thin. I felt like
Mm.
that could make me kind of an impatient mom, and I didn't wanna show up that way. I so we committed to trying for one, and then funny enough, we had some issues with infertility. So then it kind of tipped the scale more in the direction of one and done, just because we were like, do we want to go through that again? We didn't end up having to go through IVF, but it just is like an emotional roller coaster. And it took 2 years. And then I was a little bit older, and so the feeling was like maybe it would be even harder. So we were always just kind of like, yeah, but we're probably one and done. We'll see, but we're probably one and done. But it is interesting because COVID, had these like positives and negatives. Like, I mean, it was a crazy, wild time to be having a kid and have all these like unknowns. And then in the realm of like the larger unknowns of life, it just seemed like everything you could take for granted no longer was. And so, it's tricky when you're trying to find solid ground in your own self, right? With this giant earthquake that we, kind of been discussing in in the middle of like an enormous chasm in the world that has just shaken up everything. I mean, everyone was suddenly online doing their jobs remotely if they could, and my business changed dramatically over weeks. And then it was like, okay, the private clients I still have are online now for the foreseeable future. I mean, again, New York didn't open up really for 2 years. It didn't have an open gym. It didn't have an open Pilates studio or yoga studio for 2 years. So we all had to get on with it in a new way. And that really left a lot of openings. I mean, I've got people that I work with that that move a lot with their job. They go places, and now I see them in their hotel rooms. I'm like, why didn't we do that before?
Oh, yeah.
In some ways, it forced us to be more creative and to rethink things. And that's kind of interesting, and what had really tethered us before was now we're in this kind of free floating space. And so I had already, like, I was having to do that on multiple levels, right? Just as an individual moving into this world that feels ungrounded. And then within myself as like a newly formed, right, mother and human. So yeah, I think I had to build up a real tolerance for dealing with that instability and finding stability amidst a bunch of instability, which has been very useful for me in the last year or two. Because man, things have gotten really weird in our country. I think it's easy to go into this place where your momentum grounds to a halt and you just feel like I don't know how to make the next step because everything feels so unstable. But yeah, I mean, this is like human history, right? Like humans are messy, and if you look at it, we've had some stability for a while that humans mostly didn't have, throughout like all of history, and so now we're just back to that, and we have to kind of chart a new path forward, and we really have to find that for ourselves.
Which is so like motherhood and like
Yeah,
the messiness
exactly.
and the finding your way through. And were you scared?
Was I scared to have a baby? Like you mean of the birthing process or just to become a mother?
Both.
I was afraid of being traumatized by the birth experience for sure. Mostly because actually some very close friends of mine had. They were, they went all in on the Ina May Gaskin vibe of just your body knows how to do it. And then they both ended up having to have emergency C-sections and having really painful, long, birthing processes. And they both felt really just floored by it and had a lot of trauma. One went on to have another child, and it was just as difficult, the experience of giving birth, but it was not as traumatic because she kind of knew what was coming. And and she had both of those children before I got pregnant. And so it was really helpful to have close friends where I got like a kind of front seat to what was going on. And in the wellness world, I think I really could have dived in that way, like just been like, yeah, just trust your body. And there is an element of that that you do need to get really in touch with. I was able to have an unmedicated birth because I was really deep in my breath because I mean, if I didn't have a meditation and breath work background, I don't think I would have been able to do that. I could just say hands down, I can see why people just go, I'll take that epidural. But I also I saw a lot of different experiences and I was able to metabolize them. I had a friend who had like a 6-hour labor that was completely unfruitful and she wasn't able to dilate. And then she got the epidural, took a nap, woke up fully dilated, had her child naturally. So there are just all these stories you hear and you realize there's such a wide range of stories. And so for me, what ended up really helping me was reading all those different stories and understanding the complications that can occur. And not to fearmonger, but just to know what's possible. And then to go from the outside, not in that moment of upheaval, go, what would I want or what would I want to do in that scenario? And I think it allowed me to go in with my eyes wide open. Thankfully, I didn't end up having to have any interventions, but I wouldn't have been as traumatized. But, if I went in with this idea, like, everyone knows their body and I just need to tap into mine. I know mine well. And then you feel like this weird, it was almost like how I felt about breastfeeding. Like, why isn't my body doing what it's supposed to? Like I felt at odds, like why didn't, like everyone says, like in nature will just take its course. Why didn't it? So I think we have to nowadays, especially more naturally oriented women in the wellness space, do have to worry a little bit about that pitfall. There is this kind of wormhole, this rabbit hole that we can fall into where it's an echo chamber of just positive thinking will get you there. Lots of women died in labor back in the past without these interventions. Let's get real too, right? So I was just always trying to find the middle ground in everything. And I think that still steers me today, that concept of like, where's the middle ground? Like I'm pretty progressive, but then also, all right, guys, like, can we talk about these issues, in the progressive arena? And I think always having our eyes wide open can help. And then trying to be as centered as possible will help us not kind of react or go too far off into one direction without something tethering us, right? Reality tethering us.
Yes, it sounds like you did your due diligence in all the ways that you could for the physical experience and the psychological experience of the actual birthing. And then when it came to actually being a mother and your life changing in this way, it sounds like in that way too, you sat with it for a while and decided ultimately, yes, I think this is the path I would like to pursue. But did you have fears of, will I lose myself? Will I not have time for my things? Like,
Oh, 1,000%. Yeah. And that was something I definitely grappled with. I mean, it is a waiting game. But, it's like, especially if you have a lot of things you like to do. Like, I mean, I had a whole jewelry line that I think I made 3 new pieces in like 2 or 3 years. And I just had to be okay with that. Like I was just selling my old pieces, like the old designs. And I had to be okay with that because like we moved states, we had a baby. I was like rebuilding my career in a new place. Like we were still in the middle of COVID. It's like everything takes its time. So I just had to kind of allow for that. And then at the same time, when you make space for that, you realize like, oh, like this is a precious time I'll never get back. Like my kid is only 1, my kid's only 2, my kid's only 3, for that 1 year and then it's over.
mhm.
And so you have to soak it up. Um, so it's like a push and pull. And I don't know that I ever found I don't think there was ever going to be 100% satisfactory. I would have needed to be very independently wealthy with like a nanny who could take her at night and allow me to go off in my jewelry space and then come back and be with her for a good part of the day, but then have someone there, whenever I needed to do my things. And that's just not to be for most of us. So then you're stuck with reality, but like it's good in its way. I mean, there's a season, for everything. And there's just, especially as a mom of like what I assumed was probably going to be, I had to assume probably one and done. So I kind of knew this season is like the only time I get this. So I got to soak it up now. So I think that's one of the things that has led me the most. It's like a fear of FOMO of not being present, a fear of FOMO of missing out on
Mhm.
what I'm actually living amidst. And it's so easy to do because there's so many things to do as a mother. I mean, just running a house, just like making sure there's groceries, feeding everyone 3 times a day, cleaning the house, all the little things the baby needs, every step along the way. And so that part was challenging for me, especially when I wanted to be being creative. But then I'm like, I'm over here doing dishes. Yeah. The most creative I was getting was like in the kitchen. But then I got baby snuggles too. So that was pretty great.
Yeah. And like you were saying, this idea of artful living, like being creative and like how you're problem solving with your baby and like how you're being with the baby and how you're existing and continuing to anchor yourself the best you can just seems like a whole different sort of creativity that one can't totally imagine. And I'm also thinking about the value of the kind of selflessness that we probably just don't do many times in our life the way that one does when they have a small child
Yeah.
and how that can serve you. And it just changes you. It's like this whole other perspective.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because in yoga, there's a lot of orientation towards service and really in conscious living in general across the board. When you look at like a lot of Eastern philosophy, they talk a lot about how like service is one of the fastest paths to real, like expanded consciousness, right? This awareness that we're all connected. And it's because you like back out a little bit of all your little entanglements, and they're
Mhm.
fun, they're interesting, right? You move along in life with those entanglements, but they can consume you too, and you can become really self-involved. I think creative people can, and it is important
We love our
to,
entanglements.
yeah. We love the dramas, we pay for the dramas. We go to the AMC theater on a Friday night to pay for the drama. Everyone loves it, but that's because it's entertaining. But we need that other perspective to get out of our own heads and get out of our own lives and do something for other people and then see what other people are working with. And that can just shift our whole mind space around how we show up in the other things that we do. So,
And
yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like one of the things that my daughter is gifting me because she's a bit of a slowpoke, and my husband is too. I'm just like, okay, universe, you're telling me to slow down. I get it. Because I'm fast talking, fast thinking. I'm definitely a fast processor. That's part of my creativity is having a lot of little ideas and I like to jot them down. And my husband is more like a slower, deeper thinker. And he's a musician and he makes a lot of music and he'll just kind of sit and tinker with a song and it becomes a song over long periods of time. And my daughter has this really similar way of being to him. He's a Pisces and she's a Cancer. And so they're both these very
Oh,
watery signs and they're so deep in that way. She's always asking deep questions. And that's been a gift, I think. It forces me to kind of slow down with what I'm doing and I don't get as much done. I am not as productive. And there is a part of me that struggles with that because I love a to-do list and checking things off of it. But I think again, it's almost like that push and pull of the intellect versus intuition and other aspects of your being. When we're forced to slow down, that's where those other parts, the little whisperings within the self can kind of bubble up more naturally. And
mhm.
so, yeah. And I mean, a lot of the things I do cooking, gardening, they are forcing me to so many of those interests of mine are these like processes. It's not just a one and done. You plant a seed and then boom, you've got something. It's a whole long process and you learn something amidst that process, you know.
And it's making me think of too the processes that we choose that we commit to. And then we're really in them for a long time, and how much that shapes our life and the way that we become inside of our life, which has me thinking about you have been married for a pretty long time. How long have you been married now?
10 years. Yeah, 10 years this year.
Wow.
Yeah. But together for 18. Yeah.
Wow. And how old are you?
Me, I'm 44.
Pretty young for that long, too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's interesting because when I met Boyd, I actually, we were friends for a long time,
How long?
in a similar friend group. He played music in college with my high school friends, some high school buds of mine. So in college, they created a band together. And then he was also in the same art school. So I like knew him from different veins.
So you
And
guys met in Florida.
Yep, at the University of Florida. Yep. And then I moved to New York with my boyfriend at the time. We were together for a long time. We were together for 5 years and another good friend. And so, we moved up to New York and then he was complaining to me. He was in Philly at the time and he was complaining to me about his challenge of getting graphic design work. And I was like, we have so many graphic design friends in New York. You need to come. And so he ended up moving to New
Wow.
York and getting work. And then eventually, like 2 years down the road, we ended up starting to date. But it was this funny thing because previously I had really thought that the person I was committed to was my life partner. We both spoke of each other in that way. And yeah, our relationship wasn't great for like a year, that last year. So it was kind of coming undone and all of that was falling away. I really questioned my ability to see things clearly. Divorce is everywhere. I was really uninterested in that kind of messiness, having kids and divorce, and lots of people come through it, but I just had a real aversion to it. So I always thought I probably wouldn't get married and wouldn't have kids. And
Mm.
but he and we started dating and it was like this weird little thing where we had been friends for a long time. And so we like dipped our toes in. We literally would just like kiss sometimes. And then be like, no, no, just kidding. We're just friends. And it did seem like we didn't want to cross a line. We were flirty with each other, but we really enjoyed each other's company. We played some music together, and I think both of us were a little bit afraid to cross a line that then we couldn't come back from. So finally, yeah, we kind of bit the bullet at some point. I was out in California and he was in New York and an old girlfriend of his who he wasn't with anymore moved to New York and he mentioned it to me and I had all sorts of feelings and I was like, why do I thought we're like a situationship. Why do I have these feelings right now? But I sat with him for a while and then I was just like, I feel like we should either decide not to be together or like we should just make it official. And he was like, let's make it official. And after that, we were an item, but we lived apart for 4 years, 4 of those years. And then we moved in together and then we were still together for a few years before he proposed. I mean, he's a slowpoke. And I think I just was like, no one knows themselves enough to know. And we were young when we got together. I was 26. And so I was like, what's the rush? If we're going to be together forever, what's the rush? And let's just evolve together and see if we do evolve together. And that's kind of how we both took it. And it was actually a huge blessing because I don't know, it's interesting. He is a complete opposite from me in so many ways. I have a lot of that like Aries fire when it comes to my emotional relationships. And I realized looking back that I dated a lot of fiery people. And my family is like big and boisterous and fiery, and that's how we deal with conflict resolution, right? And my husband's side of the family is like the exact opposite. Like they're like, if we don't agree with something, we just internalize it and sit on it until it festers for the rest of our lives. I mean, just that like the exact opposite, like both can be toxic in their own ways. Right. And so we both had some stuff to work through like we all do, but it was coming from such opposite arenas that I just kept feeling like it was weird for a long time at the beginning of our relationship, like way before we moved in together. I thought, this is not my forever relationship for that reason. Like he's too opposite of me. This is not my forever relationship, but I'm learning so much. Like,
Mm.
I'm not done with this. I feel like I've got a lot to learn here. And it's like, it's such a good mirror for me. And in this moment, but it's not forever. I kept, because I just felt like, I think just every other relationship I'd ever had, every relationship that was modeled to me was just much more boisterous and abrasive. And he's like a quiet guy. And for a long time, we worked with the ways that we would deal with our conflicts. Anytime that something came up, he would just be like, let's not talk about it. And I would be like, oh no, we need to talk about this and very intently, right now. So I feel like we both had some growing to do. And as we grew closer and closer towards one another to that middle ground, we realized what a good thing we had going, like as a yogi, I'm committed to that mirror, right? And so there's nothing like someone that's your opposite to show you, And the funny thing is that I've had these arguments with my ex where that we would just get so fiery so quick, both so passionate and really believed what our side, our viewpoint. And so like he would engage me in that way and immediately that spark, he would bring the spark, then I would meet it with spark. And so when my husband is just quiet and then gives me an eyebrow and looks at me, it makes me hear the thing I just said, or maybe the tone of what I said. Maybe it wasn't exactly what I said, but the tone of it, and then it puts it a little bit into perspective and I'm able to write correct, in a way that just doesn't happen when someone met me with fire back then, at least. So, yeah, we just had a lot to learn with each other. And he learned how to be more frank and how to find the words, to put words to the uncomfortable feelings and like sift through them. And that was super important for him. So, yeah, I mean, I feel like we are kind of integral to each other's development at this point, And then at the same time, like he's a creative, I'm a creative, right? In different ways. And we've always had this like, when we had free time, in our early child free days, we both would have time that was like, these are my days for this. These are my evenings for this, And that was another reason why it was like easy to not live with each other is because we would come together and then we would have our days where we were separate. Then he lived one block from me. So then at some point it was like, well, I've just got really good rent over here in a backyard. So we're going to keep this situation going for a while. So it just unfolded, I think, in this really slow way. And that was, I think, yeah, in retrospect, really good for our long-term relationship. Like the relationship could breathe. It had a lot of space.
It's making me think, and maybe there's not really an answer to this, but do you think that we find the right partner for each other or we become the right partners for each other?
Well, that's so interesting. I mean, I think it has to be a little bit of both.
Mhm.
I think that like if you're really stubborn as a human, like you're going to have trouble with anyone, even someone who's really well suited to you naturally. There's going to be these moments of friction and if you're not willing to look at them, I mean, we learn so much in relationship. Stones, I think of stones like it and of course this comes back to so there's like this tumbling machine in jewelry where you can put these rocks in and you let it go and go and go and they smooth out, and that process of smoothing out happens because of the friction. And so those moments of friction, really, they're those mirror moments, they show you what you both still have to work on. And yeah, it's important to remain really open and curious and a little neutral. So we're not like immediately like assigning blame for the friction to, because it's always going to be to the, the other person, right? The blame is never on you. So, it doesn't necessarily have to be a blame game. I think that's important too, because I think in the world that I grew up in, and I really had to unlearn winning, winning an argument and I became a lot less interested in winning and a lot more interested in like how we can move forward together. Right. And like how we can get past this one thing. Like, what is it? What pattern is it? Is it my pattern? Is it your pattern? Is it both our patterns coming together and creating this issue? Right. How can we both work to, and I think as like partners committed to growth in yourself, right? Each of you, yourselves, and then each other. It's like this constant push and pull where you are trying to move that relationship to a place of growth, and it requires growth on both your parts. And sometimes it means that you are lovingly holding a mirror up to something that is really holding you guys back on their end, and then vice versa, right? That means you
Mhm.
have to be ready and open. And when you have those moments served to you in a loving way, then, and they land and you realize you need to make change, like that humbles you ideally for the next moment where you're the one offering the mirror, right? In reality, it's like an offering. They don't have to take it. And so if you want to be combative or you want to play the blame game, then the person's just going to put up a defense. And then, you don't evolve. That person doesn't evolve and you don't evolve together. So
Mhm.
it is a dance for sure. But I feel like that's something we've gotten pretty good at over the years.
And that's the cool thing too, right? Things can continue to shift and get better.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and also I think it's important in a long-term relationship to recognize your partner's like their gas tank or something. When someone is
Mm.
running on empty, especially when you have a kid or maybe it's like a big moment in time, like they've taken on a new job and they really have to up level in some way and it's taking a lot of their energy, or you guys move states after living somewhere for 10 years, or 15 years. He lived in that apartment for 10 years before we moved. It was an ordeal to move and it was a lot of upheaval, and we just had to give each other a lot of grace, and I think that that's another thing is like not like evolving and growth is uncomfortable and it requires like energy to make that shift out of the pattern and the habit to this new way of being, inhabiting the relationship or showing up for each other. That energy, it's not free. It requires a lot out of us and we don't always have it to give. So in these moments where a lot is going on, like just holding space while that person is a messy human and is imperfect, is a act of love.
Mhm. And as you move through all of this and being in a relationship for a long time, what do you think is how would you explain, like, what do you think is vital to, like, having a healthy sex life, maintaining that through a long relationship
Yeah.
or
I
even a
mean,
short one?
yeah, exactly, right? Depending. I mean, I yeah, I do think that kids can be very consuming. Even we just have one, right? And it's still very consuming. I do find that like keeping connected, each of us separately to our artistic endeavors makes a big
Mm.
difference because there is something
Mm.
about that creativity, which also like you know, real vital sexuality requires curiosity and creativity, right? And like trying something new, being open to like doing something a little different sometimes, right? Spicing things up. And again, you have to have energy for that. So it's like this push and pull, right? There's going to be moments where you guys are both just really tired, or like maybe one is like feeling something, but the other one had a really hard day. And so again, giving grace, but then trying to prioritize it, which, takes a little bit of privilege. Like, do I have some family that can be a babysitter for my kiddo so we can actually go out and have a conversation over dinner that meanders and isn't, interrupted 1700
Mhm.
by our lovely little being, or, or like, do we have the money to get a babysitter so that we can do that on the regular? It's funny
Mhm.
because I have a friend who is on the like very wealthy side. She like grew up in New York with a lot of privilege. And she was asking me, are you guys getting out? I was like, yeah, I mean, we do something about twice a month, and she's like, oh my God, only twice a month? Alone together. And, I'm like, well, I mean, she goes to bed and we still hang out, but like, yeah, going out on the town and spending $180 on a, a babysitter.
Totally.
Yeah, we only do that twice a month, we don't have unlimited funds here. But even that, it's crazy what a difference it can make. And then
Mhm.
one of the things that we instilled in our relationship way prior to having a kid that we started back up once we were like settled enough in Atlanta and like it had opened back up post COVID enough is that we once a month would like one of us like takes on the reins of doing some, being the instigator of everything, getting the babysitter, planning it, deciding what it is we're doing. And that's pretty fun, so the other person doesn't know what it's going to be, until you tell them. And it like puts a little bit of spontaneity in there and it just forces the other person to do a little bit of that groundwork that I think needs to be happening all the time, putting in a little bit of energy for like a good time with your partner, that's a gift.
I really like that, like, regularly switching back and forth, like, who's taking the lead and who's doing the instigating, the initiating, because it can
Yeah.
be easy too for it to get a little bit lost on one end or the other and just fall into a pattern where, like, this person is just generally the one who does that.
Has the ideas, Yeah,
Yeah,
has the pulse on the restaurants, or whatever.
totally.
Yeah, I know.
That is some good wisdom, Cassandra.
Well, I'm happy to share it in case it's useful for anyone. I mean, yeah. Yeah, we are sometimes very surprised, and we feel lucky too. I think sometimes it's just a little bit of luck, that you're like with the person that you're like, wow, we've been together 18 years and still got that sparkle. you know? Still
Totally.
feel excited to hang out with you on a Friday night, like on our couch, kind of exhausted from the week. What
Mhm.
are we going to Netflix and chill, or
Yeah.
whatever?
Well, that is a great place, I think, for us to end. For now, I know I'm gonna wrangle you back here a million times.
Like, I've got an idea.
Totally, totally, because I just love talking to you.
Well, we can always wax poetic on so many things, Sky. That's, I think, part of our, love for each other is we can just get into some rabbit holes.
Totally. We are 2 rabbit hole lovers. Is there anything why don't we share again about, like, anything you wanna tell people about right now or, like, where people can find you, all that good sort of stuff, what you have coming up, even though it's on our last episode, but in case people are listening
Yeah.
to this in isolation.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I lead a few retreats a year. We're going to Menorca in October this year, and then it looks like probably next February we'll be headed to Holbox Island. So,
I've been to
yeah, the
Hobosh with
retreat
you, it's
section.
amazing.
Yeah, I know. Oh, yeah, really enjoy that place and want to spend some more time in that energy of that sea, that tranquil sea that just goes out for miles. So that's a big one. And then also I teach online once a week, an intermediate advanced class, but you don't necessarily have to be intermediate advanced. You can kind of take on whatever amount of challenge you want to and then leave the rest behind. It's a bit of a choose your own adventure always, and that's through the Ishta Yoga platform. And that's on Wednesday nights. Let's see. And then if you're in Atlanta, I teach 4 classes a week also, a few studios. And then if you're a yoga teacher, I also offer mentorship in a variety of ways, um, especially kind of around how to make it a sustainable business for yourself and how to launch into the privates arena. So, yeah.
And we will link all of the ways to connect with Cassandra below so that you can just easily click around and find that.
Oh, you can check out my jewelry line.
Yes, we will link the jewelry below too. The jewelry is amazing, and we talked a little bit about that in the last episode too. But until our next conversation, thank you so much for
Always
coming
good to see you,
on. You are
Sky.
the best. This was so wonderful.
You're the best.
You're the best.
All right, dear.
Thank you so much for listening to Venus and Gemini. If this episode resonated, it would mean the world to me if you would subscribe or leave a review or share it with someone you love. Until then, see you guys next time.